Thank you to the organizers for doing this. My name is Nitasha, and I would like to offer a few comments here at this crucial juncture. So when we think about the current situation in Ukraine and in Russia, it is very tempting, and often the media has been framing it as a sort of morality tale. I implore upon you all and more of us to reject this morality tale framing, because war is not the answer. It's never the answer. What we must strive for is peace and justice. This is really an urgent task that faces all of us anywhere who have experiences of oppression, either lived experiences or experiences of work on oppression. What we see in the Ukrainian case, of course, is a territorial conflict. It's a conflict that is fast escalating, and it has all the hallmarks of a conflict that can get entrenched, because it is a conflict, as the literature shows us, about territory. It is between rivals, and in such kinds of conflicts, the length of time matters. So the longer that this goes on, the more likely it is that the positions get hardened and entrenched, and diplomacy becomes much harder. So we have to move beyond the simplistic framings to try and accept the situation as it currently is, and to see what the ways out of it are. And in that context, I would like to offer a few remarks. So firstly, I want to say that it's really important not to confuse peace with appeasement, diplomacy with appeasement. War is a failure, not diplomacy. What is really important here is to not oversimplify history. Even when we look back to the interwar history, people often oversimplify and say, oh, well, the alternative was appeasement to Hitler. That really wasn't. Even the people who were, so archival research tells us that even the people who were talking about peace at that time, even there were people who would have preferred appeasement, but there were people who thought of justice as being important. So it is always possible to find these ways, and we can only find these ways through negotiation, diplomacy, and reconciliations involving history and memory. And all of that is hard work, but it's better than the bombs that are raining down on people and the global cascades of misery that are going to be set in motion as a result of what's going on right now. So I want to say that it's really important, therefore, right now, to be aware of the ways in which militarism, masculinity, misogyny, and nationalism are combining to create territorial fixations and escalating these conflicts. It's also important to remember the strategic hypocrisy on things relating to sovereignty and self-determination. There are peoples around the globe who have seen this, peoples in the so-called third world, the formerly colonized parts of the world, who feel strongly about it, because we have witnessed all of those wars and we have seen the entrenched conflicts. And it is really important to keep that in mind too, and to distance ourselves from the pernicious nationalisms that legitimize oppressions in their name, as important as it is, of course, to denounce invasions and to denounce authoritarians who do not care for the miseries they inflict upon their own populations. What has been especially disturbing over the last few weeks is to see the selective humanity of the refugees, where various kinds of racisms have been normalized, so that it is seen as very unusual for a civilized people somehow to be facing this, when in fact, the longer history of that civilization has left a little, a trail of dead bodies globally through various kinds of enslavements and colonizations, and to not refer to this as some kind of a return to history. It is also important to recognize the virtue signaling of corporate companies that seek to ban admissions or movies or whatever from Russia for what they are, simply virtue signaling. We must not slip into a discourse of competing victimhoods, but at the same time, we must be aware of the kinds of real and contrived grievances that can be manufactured by authoritarians who weaponize an anti-Western sentiment, at the same time as we recognize the hypocrisies that have been carried out in the name of democracy and freedom by the West. So it is important to be aware of both sides of this situation, in fact, to be aware of all of these sides. In my own work, I've referred to this kind of use of humiliation and a weaponization of the past as the moral wound. And this it works in ways that are used to silence and shut down human rights talk as being somehow Western, as rights and justice and democracy talk as being Western, while at the same time laying claim to a anti-colonial history that is also about human rights. So there are various contradictions in the ways in which this anti-West sentiment is weaponized, and it is important to be aware of all of that. At this point at this juncture in world history, we face a serious risk of escalation between and possibly the involvement of nuclear armed states. We've been here before, and it's a terrible situation. I mean, speaking as someone who has written and worked on Kashmir for a very long time and is Kashmiri herself, I just want to quote something that I've said before, which is that we must find ways of addressing the rights and aspirations of populations in the absence of spectacular violent incidents that bring regions to the brink of nuclear war. Otherwise, what sort of incentives do we set up if we let these problems fester and then only attend to them once they get to this point? The really radical thing here is, of course, to do the dialogues of history and memory in internationally supported, credible, non-partisan spaces so that we can find the ways forward to pave the way for mutually just reconciliations that respect people's rights, responsibilities, and freedoms. It is always possible to find a way that does not feed off literally the blood and misery of people who will die and who will suffer as a result of the cascading economic misery globally, including some of the most marginalized peoples in the global south. At the same time as the military-industrial complex will get enriched, we have already seen reports that the stocks of, the war stocks of Lockheed Martin, of Northrop, etc., have gone up by 20%. And this is at the same time as the poor will find it harder and harder anywhere to be able to just afford fuel, and the knock-on contexts, the effects of all of that across a range of things that people need for their subsistence and livelihoods, not to mention what the Ukrainians themselves will be facing, which is in Ukraine, which is, of course, the horrors of an invasion that can become more and more entrenched and draw more actors globally into it, and become even more complex and multi-state and harder to even make any move forward on. Therefore, I just want to close this by saying that we need to be aware of the fact that real solidarity does not look like condoning authoritarian territorial invasions, and it does not also look like condoning nationalist warmongering and bandwagoning and the hounding actually of academics, including of realists and others. We must respect that there are a plurality of views, but at the same time, it is not hard. It is the easiest and most rational thing to be able to see here that what is needed, what can de-escalate the situation, is diplomacy, dialogue, and thinking towards peace rather than a hardening of positions and a lack of understanding of the global effects of all of this. I would like to just quote from a Renoir movie that the awful thing about life is this, that everyone has their reasons. And as we see in conflicts too, denouncing other actors are irrational or insane is not the answer. The important thing to understand here is that there are competing narratives of rationality and reason that are at work here on all sides. And the only way to be both sensible as well as acting from a moral conscience is to be able to extend solidarity to those who are suffering now, and to be able to understand the hypocrisies that have led to this point, and the need not to escalate this further in the interests of the war machine, but to actually move towards peace and greater understanding that can help with this situation, urgent as it is. Thank you.